Hello and welcome back to the Antler Studios development vlog. I'm Tom, the lead designer here at Antler Studios. We're a small indie team working on our first major project, Project Grove. To kick off this week, we get to see some of the new content for the demo we're working on right now. Inside this demo, you get to see section 2, which includes some exciting bubble gameplay and some more sort of action elements, creating some really exciting gameplay sequences. In terms of assets, we've been working on updating the journal and compass assets to their final forms. We'll be working on the UI and user experience of the journal in the coming sprints. We've also been adding more elements to the environment that are sort of rotten and provide sort of the antagonist of the game, which is this disease. And for the updated gameplay, we've also been working on some more manta ray elements and animal assets that the player can interact with. So, moving on to the tutorial section of this video. Quick disclaimer, this is completely self-taught by me. I've never had any professional training in animation or rigging or even modeling, so this is something that is a process that I figured works for me, and I know that there are certain shortcuts and corners that I cut that mean that animating is a slightly different process, so just be aware of that, and if you want to learn more about this stuff, there is lots of good resources online that you can research as well. But this I do find is a very quick and sort of dirty method to get good looking models rigged and animated in the shortest time possible, and making it sort of, designer friendly rather than having to be a experienced rigger / animator. So with that, let's dive into the rigging process. First up, let's just look at how to make a simple bone structure for one of the legs, or one of the back legs, hind legs, for this squirrel, which is what I did as part of my work in this sprint, was rigging and animating the squirrel, so it's fresh in my mind. First off, you want to go probably into a side view and make sure that your button up here is ticked so that you can see bones through the mesh. First off, what I like to do is create my first bone and press W instantly to go back into move mode, hold down X for grid snapping, move that back into the world 0 position. You want to rename bones as you go just to make your life a bit easier, so I'm going to name this one Root. Moving on, I'm going to start with the leg structure going from the pelvis down to a toe tip. And I just want to put these in the general area from this view as far as I can tell where those things should be rotating around, where those joints should be going. This is where your reference and research into bone structures and all that sort of stuff comes in handy. But after you've done a couple of animals and done a few people, you kind of get the gist of where these things should go and what works best for a model. So let's start with the pelvis, move to the hip, which should be around here, go down to the knee, to the ankle, and then to the toe tip. The toe tip generally doesn't need any skinning or data in, but it is a useful bone to have in terms of the rotations and IKs for later on. This hip doesn't look quite right because it's, see it's cutting through there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press D on my keyboard, and that'll mean I can move it independently of its children. So I can move that one over here a bit further this way, which makes a bit more of that shape that I want. So with these joints now in the correct place, we're going to go through and rename them into the correct things. What you want to make sure is that your joints have a prefix or suffix that is _L or _R. That means you can easily mirror the joints using that suffix. So with those named, we can now go into our pelvis and our root and just parent those quickly. And now that's sort of our main chain for our left leg setup. However, if you go to the 3D view, you see that they're all in the center, which is not what we want. So the first thing you want to do is just go to your front view and move them over into a generally correct position for each bone. And that is the core of a basic rig done. However, to animate and control this leg, what we really want is some IKs so that we can easily put our contact positions and have those be static and stationary as we move the rest of the rig around the sort of feet and leg areas. So first up, what we want to do is go and press this button up here, which is your IK handle creator. Go over here and press tool controls so you can get up those. Reset the tool, and this is the settings that we want for a basic hip to ankle IK. So with this tool equipped, just go from hip and then press on the ankle, and that sets up your IK. Now, if we move this IK, which has been added as a new object in your hierarchy, you can move that around. You see that the length of the joints don't change. It's just the rotations and locations. And this is really useful for animating bones and legs and stuff like that. So with that set up, let's return that to its original position. But we want to be able to control this. And firstly, there's an issue. If you look, if I rotate this up, you see that the foot is rotating. If I go from the side, it's very obvious. The foot is rotating sort of with the IK handle, which is not what we want. We want the foot to be rotated separately from that. So return that all to the right position. Go back to your IK tool. You want to take this rotate plane solver and change it to single chain solver. Now press on your ankle and then press to the toe tip. And this is your second IK handle. Now before we go into moving and mirroring these IKs, let's look at quickly renaming them. Make sure that you have the _L like you did before. This will mean mirroring them is much cleaner and will require less renaming down the line. Next up, what we're going to do is make a control so we can move and control these separate from the bones. Because what you'll notice is if you go to your channels, these IK handles and bones all have information and data inside them that is going to be detrimental to animating and makes it difficult to animate. So what we want is something that's nice and clean, all zeroed out, that will allow us to animate things. So go to curves and surfaces, create a circle. Now position and scale this circle so it kind of mimics the foot and is in a useful position. So now it's in a good position, what we want to make sure we do is that the root of this curve is on the joint itself. So press D, hold down V for vertex snapping and joint snapping, and snap that into the center of that joint there. But as we see we've still got rotation and translation values that we don't want. So modify, freeze transformations, edit, delete all by type, history, and that will make a nice clean object that's in the right place and is a very good control for us. Now let's rename this to our ankle control. Now what we want to do is take our two IKs that are not the effectors but the IKs themselves, and just using our middle mouse button, drag them onto that control to parent them, or just select and press P. Now when we move this control, you'll be able to see that this leg moves just how we want. And from the side you can now see that this ankle to toe tip is staying the same rotator, meaning that the foot will always be horizontal unless we use our control to twist and to turn it. And this is really good control, especially for run cycles, walk cycles, and those sort of things, which are some of the hard elements to animate. So the first thing I'm going to do is take our hip _L, select it, and we're going to be mirroring this joint. I'm going to quickly delete the keyframe I accidentally put in there. So no keyframes. And what we want to do is go to skeleton, mirror joints, open up our settings, make sure that we're on the YZ and the orientation is ticked, and that when we are replacing names for duplicated joints, we're searching for _L, which is what we've named our things, our joints, and we're going to replace them with _R. This will mean everything's named nicely and you don't have to go through and rename all your joints again. So everything's been duplicated over, including, as you'll notice, the IK handles, which have been moved out of the group and put into their own section here. And this means that, you know, everything's set up as we had it in the last leg, and all the positions are correct because we've made sure that our mesh is nice and mirrored down the center, and that we're on, you know, the root of the world. The only thing that wasn't mirrored is our control. Now you could have duplicated it earlier, which would have been smarter, but if you've been following along and you haven't duplicated it yet, just Control C, Control V it, and that'll make another one. However, what that also does, because it's now, you know, controlling IKs, it's also copied the whole root. So what you want to do is this pasted __root, to select that and delete. This pasted _ankle, we just want to rename this to ankle control _R and take it out of this group. However, this hasn't been mirrored across like the joints, so we want to make sure that we press hold down V when we're moving and vertex snap that into the right ankle joint position. We'll just press F to focus and make sure that's in the right position. That, however, of course, has given it translation again. So what we want to do is select it, go to modify, freeze transformations, edit, delete by type, history. Now we've got another clean control that's named and in the correct position. All we need to do is, as we did before, take our two IKs, middle mouse, drag them onto our control. Now we have our two controls. I can select them, and these can move nicely, creating, natural leg movement, and we can rotate them to like kick out the back legs and all that sort of stuff. If you watch other more in-depth rigging tutorials, there are things you can do with positioning and rotation and creating knee control, so you can control the angle. But this is a quick and dirty solution, and so we don't want any of those controls because that just convolutes the animating process. And especially if you're new or self-taught, some of those things can be overwhelming. So let's close out our mirror joint options, and we'll move on to skinning. As if by magic, here's one I made earlier. This rig is just a more fleshed out version of what we just did. As you can see, the leg setup is almost exactly the same as before, but I've added the tail, the spine, the neck, the head, the ears, and the nose, and the other front legs. And this is just a bit more complex, but is totally the same techniques that I've just shown you, but it's a bit better for showing the skinning process. So this currently is unskinned, so you can move the mesh around, it's not linked at all. The rig is exactly the same, so you can move the legs up and down, you can do all that sort of good stuff with them. As you can see, what I've done is I've keyed a few poses, but this is not necessary, but it does help with the skinning process. So if you think that you want to test things out, key a couple poses that you can scrub through and go, okay, well, how does my skinning look at these different deformations? But we'll get to that in a bit. The first technique I'm going to show you is the really quick and dirty option, which for very simple models, especially things that only have like one joint, if you're animating a tentacle or something like that, or a tendril or a tail, these sort of elements can be animated in this method because it's a one chain of objects, and it doesn't really need any finesse in the skinning. So this method is the automatic Maya driven skinning. So if you take your squirrel and select your root, go to rigging up here on the tabs and go skin, bind skin. Open up the options, and what you're going to want to do is check joint hierarchy, geodesic voxel. This is the main thing that's going to change how you rig, how you skin, and this is going to help a lot when it comes to making this skinning automatic much better. Max influences, you might need to change this depending on how complex your rig is, but generally, 4 to 5, I'm going to change this down to 4, will work fine. Weight distribution can be distance or neighbors. I find that both kind of work, but let's try neighbors this time. And you want to make sure that this skinning method is dual quadration. I don't really know what the difference is between these, but this one has a far better result to the others. The resolution can be what you want. I choose 512. It takes a bit longer, but it also does great stuff. So let's bind our skin. So that took a few seconds, but it is done, and we bound our skin. Now if I scrub through these poses, you can see our model is now moving, and this is very exciting. But you can also see that we're already seeing some instant issues with this automatic skinning method. The stomach of the squirrel is completely caved in, and this is because they'll be weighting towards other areas of the mesh that are pulling it away from the spine. So this method, you could just leave it here if you've got a very simple mesh. As you can see, the tail automatically, it's animating nicely. The back into the tail is working just as we want. The leg also is working pretty well. It's a bit plump in the back, in the rear end, so we want to probably give some weighting back to the root. But up here in this stomach area, it's not too bad. We could probably take a bit away here. But you can see that the leg is actually doing reasonably well. And that's sort of the joy of the automatic, is that you get a good baseline. However, the problem with the automatic is changing that baseline is quite difficult. So if you want to go in and change these, press your mesh, go up to skin and paint skin weights and tick the tick box so you can get the options up. And now this will show you the weighting of the current thing you've got selected. So for example, this is already not quite right because the root is never going to move and shouldn't have any skinning data. But as you can see, it has skinning data. So the first thing we want to do is go to replace on our paint operation, skin weight interactive, change the value and the opacity to 1. Make sure you have your root selected up here and press flood. Value to 0 even, and press flood. Now we've removed that weighting. However, with this automatic method, it sometimes moves them to odd areas. So if we scrub back, you can see that the stomach is already looking a lot better because a lot of the issue was the fact that the root was taking that weighting. This method is more about going through, finding different areas that don't look quite right, and using the soft brush with add on a slight value So this soft brush add slight value combination is very useful for just giving some areas a bit more. You don't generally want to be removing, because removing is what causes a lot of issues in terms of it not knowing which joint to put it towards. So you want to generally be adding. So on this pelvis, I can see there's a dark patch here where there's no skinning data, which is not quite right. We don't want this, because this means that this area isn't being skinned, but all the areas around it are. Generally what we want is smooth flowing from the warm colours to the cool colours. If you start having sort of areas in the middle of it that don't format to that, you start getting some funky skinning options. So with this add, we're just going to add in here a little bit and then, smooth that off slightly, like so. And now already, if we scrub through, we can see our stomach is already looking a lot better. So now what we want to do is go down to spine 01. And as you can see, this is where the real issue starts coming in. Because the spine was near the top, which is where we want it to rotate and animate, it meant it didn't get much of this at all. It didn't get any of the stomach, but we want it to be influencing the stomach. Let's go back to our base pose and add in some more here. And this is really what this first quick and dirty method is all about. It's just adding in areas and redistributing some of that weight so that it looks a bit better and more natural. Now if we scrub through, the stomach is starting to look a bit more natural, and we start seeing some issues up here. So let's go to spine 02. The extremities, like legs and feet, generally do fine with this method because they are having less bones around them. Where you get problems is the shoulders, the pelvis, the neck areas, and the spine, where there's a lot of joint density and it doesn't quite know where to put things, and so you get these sort of funky situations. So let's go to our spine 02, and again add some more in from down here. Give it a bit more up here, a bit more in here, and then where it really needs it is in those armpits to stop the arm from moving the armpits too much. And this is really a skill of just practicing and testing different methods out to see where you want to put your weights and how things want to work for you. And now we go back to our scrubbed pose, and we can see that that's looking a lot better. That's looking more like an arm and a chest. So let's go select off our squirrel onto our root, and that'll mean that we can see it with the textures on. And again, you can see this is all starting to come together. And that's really how you can do your first method of skinning. Now on to the second method, which is slightly more time consuming, I would say, but it's more effective at getting really good results. And I think, I believe from what I can research and find, it's the more proper way of doing skinning. So the first thing we want to do is, because this method requires a lot of selecting vertices, if you look at if we try and select a vertex right now, you'll see that if we drag and it'll just grab the bones. I don't know why this must be a thing in Maya that bones are considered more important than vertices. So what we're going to want to do, just to make our lives a bit easier, is on your channel box / layer editor, add a new layer, name it rig, select everything in your rig, so both the root and all the different controls. Right click on your rig layer and go add selected objects. This means when we are just doing skinning and selecting vertices, we can just hide that. And it's very easy for us to then select vertices. So with that hidden now, what we're going to want to do is go back to our paint skin weights tool, click on our squirrel, and the first step of this, basically what you're doing here is selecting the vertices perfectly of which should go to which bone. It means you have a lot more control, and I'd say it's a more programmatic way of doing it. It's much friendlier to people who, don't want to go through painting meshes in Maya and all that sort of stuff. So if you're that kind of person, then this method might be really good for you. The first thing you want to do is go to your pelvis and replace and set the value to flood 1, and we're going to flood all the vertices to the pelvis. So let's flood, and now this is all white. It means all the other bones have no weighting at all. To get us started, let's show our rig quickly. As you can see from the side, what we're going to be rigging is the tail. The tail is a series of joints going along, and what we're going to be wanting to do is giving influence to the rig as we go down the chain. So hiding the rig again, we're going to select all of them up to the first tailbone, which is all the way up to there. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into our paint skin weights, Now the key thing you want to do here is you see these locks over on the side. That will stop certain bones being able to get any influence. So what we're going to do is we're going to select all of our bones and then lock them. This means now no weighting can be moved, but we're going to unlock tail 1 and our pelvis. We're going to be taking weighting from our pelvis, so that needs to be unlocked. And we're going to be moving it onto our tail 1, so that needs to be unlocked. So now we're going to select tail 1, make sure it's value 1 on replace, and flood it. Now you can see we've got this, but if we go through our keyframes, this doesn't look very good. It's not smooth here, and we need to create some more influences for the other bones. So if I show the rig, you see it's curving, but only this bone is getting any influence. So first, let's smooth it out. Go back to vertex select and just select the vertices on either side, and then go into 3D view and remove any vertices that you don't want. So I don't want to be controlling the leg at all, like so. And that's a pretty good area for being blended. We could even maybe add a couple up here. No, let's not do that. So now with these ones selected, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our paint, go down to our tail, change our mode to smooth. Now this is where it's really important that you have these bones locked, because if they're unlocked, it will try and guess where it should be smoothing it to. Whereas because we've got everything locked, it'll only smooth between the pelvis and tail 1. So we'll flood that, press that a few times until it's nice and smooth. And now if we scrub through, you see you get a much smoother transition between those bones. Great. Now we're going to go and repeat this process down the tail bones. So we're going to go up and we're going to lock pelvis, because we no longer want to get influence from pelvis. We're going to unlock tail 2. We'll quickly use this to check the position of tail 2. Okay, tail 2 is right about here. So we'll hide that again and say everything from here onwards, yeah, should be flooded with 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to tail 2, change this back to replace, value 1, opacity 1, and flood. Now we go back to our vertex selection mode and select the vertex that we want to blend between. And because this bone is kind of around here, I don't really want to blend the ones over here. So I'm just going to select these two vertice loops, go back, and smooth it. And I'm going to do this with the rest of the tail, and you can kind of see how the process goes. Now we've done that, if we go into our vertex select, make sure that there are no vertices selected, go back into our paint mode on our squirrel, we can scrub through these different bones. You can see that we've got very, very clean weighting going up and down the tail. And what this leads to is just a very nice, smooth animation that doesn't have any strange influences. Often what you'll get with the automatic is sometimes, you know, a random vertex over here will be connected to a spine bone up here, and you'll get some very odd deformations because of that when you animate. Doing it this way means that you get a really clean and a very controlled result, even with a slightly slower method. For animation, I'm not going to go through the whole animation process because there's a lot to it, and if you do want us to break that down further, I'm happy to do that in a later video. Let me know. I'm going to go over a few tips and tricks for like the basic animations that we do and how to do that to a good quality with, you know, efficiency and without professional knowledge and training. So the first thing you want to be doing is make sure you're thinking about those key poses that we discussed earlier, those contact poses. So if I go to side here, where I start my animation loop is going to be when the front feet are about to touch and when the back feet are about to lift off. And then I'll end the animation in the exact same position. And this will mean it will loop nicely. I'll mention something else about looping in a minute. And then halfway through I know that those are going to be switched. The front feet are about to lift off and the back feet are about to touch. And this is just the basic loop. If I just loop between these poses, you'll see what's happening. However, what's key to note when you're animating is these pass by animations and understand some of the basic principles of, you know, where force is being put. So if you look, some of the keyframes that I'm putting in are like on this hand, making sure that when it's coming down quickly and then moving along flat. Whereas if you just let Maya automatically blend that, your hand won't touch the ground until it's its next frame over here. So it'll slide down here, which is not how hands move. And this is where looking at reference is really key, and just doing some practice and just trial and error really, I would suggest for this. In terms of keybinds you need to know, pressing S will create keyframes. If you need to move keyframes, you can either shift select them and then move them on the timeline down at the bottom, or you could copy or cut and then paste the keyframes. Copy and pasting keyframes is really useful because it means you can get perfect loops, like these keyframes are exactly the same. And for better looping animations, all you need to do is just take off a small amount from the front. So right now if it loops, you can see where it like rests for a second. So all you do is you make a perfectly looping animation with two exactly the same keyframes, and then depending on the length, you either -1 or 2 keyframes. So here I'm just going to -1 because it's a short animation. Take that from 21 down to 20, and now it loops much smoother. That's my core tips for animation. You know, I'm still learning a lot of stuff in animation, so I'll probably have a video down the line where I go a bit more in depth about that. The core thing to know when you're doing especially something like a running loop is that you get your key poses down first and get the ratio between those right. I wouldn't suggest animating from the start and going through to the end. What you should be doing is going from your core pose to the next core pose to the next core pose, and then going back and adding the flourish, the flourish, the flourish, and then going back and adding the detail, the detail, the detail, rather than trying to just do it all perfect from frame 0. Because blocking out an animation is really key, and it can show a lot of issues with an animation early on to save you a lot of time. That was very quick, but hopefully that was at least some bit helpful about animation. And that's what we've got to share with you this week. Really hope this was helpful, and if you want more in-depth discussion on any of these topics we've mentioned, let us know in the comments below and we'll make sure to make a more detailed tutorial. If you like what we're doing, make sure you wishlist Project Grove on Steam in the description below. It really does help us out. If you want to ask us, the devs, anything else, we'll be available in Discord, and you can join that through a link in the description as well. With that, have a lovely rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.